ഇന്ത്യയിലെ അറിയപ്പെടുന്ന സാമ്പത്തിക വിദഗ്ധനും ഇടത് സഹയാത്രികനും കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ പ്ലാനിംഗ് ബോർഡിൻ്റെ ഉപാധ്യക്ഷനുമായിരുന്ന ശ്രീ പ്രഭാത് പട്നായിക്കാണ് ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മളോടൊപ്പം ഉള്ളത്. സർ, വെൽക്കം. Sir, actually in Kerala, the new left government has take charge and they are on track. What do you have to say about the economic policy they have to adapt in Kerala?
You know, in Kerala there has been for a very long time a certain left thinking on economic policies. That begins from the days of EMS. That left thinking has emphasized certain things. One is land reforms. The other is substantial public expenditure on education, health and other social welfare state measures. I believe these have to be carried forward. They have to be, whatever has been achieved has to be defended and they have to be carried forward. In particular, I think there are a number of areas in which the left can actually take a lead. One is, as I said, in defending and expanding the welfare state measures, education, health, etc. Secondly, that could actually also be complemented by the introduction of right to employment as far as the urban persons are concerned, a kind of urban employment guarantee scheme. The more we move to a rights-based approach from merely a welfareist approach, I think we are making progress. The third thing I would suggest is that, you know, in Kerala, the traditional petty production sectors, including agriculture, particularly food grain production, have for a very long period of time languished. In fact, Kerala's poverty is of a very peculiar kind. It's not as if there are people who are unemployed and willing to work at very low wages, but you actually find that in these sectors like fishing, like agriculture, which are traditional petty production sectors, per capita incomes are very low. As a matter of fact, when I was in the planning board, we made a calculation that suppose the traditional fishermen's industry, every fisherman is paid the statutory minimum wage, then the entire sector would be in a deficit. In other words, they have incomes much lower. Their daily incomes are much lower than the statutory minimum wage. So the idea is to lift up the entire traditional petty production sector with government support. Some measures were undertaken to this end by the previous LDF government, which also tried to improve food security by getting land under food grain production, larger amount of land, offering a better procurement price and so on. I think those measures must continue. We must develop Kerala's agrarian economy, particularly the food grain economy, and the general traditional petty production sector. The fourth point which I would like to make is that I believe the scope of land reforms in Kerala is not over, in the sense that there is still land with plantations, unused land which can actually be used for settling landless, houseless persons. As a matter of fact, there used to be proposals when I was working in Kerala that plantation owners should be allowed to build 5-star hotels on that land. But I think that suggests anyway that there is surplus land lying around with them, substantial amounts of it, and I think that could be taken over and cultivated and distributed as far as people are concerned. On the whole, this is my last point, that I think the Kerala development strategy meant putting purchasing power in the hands of the people. You see, if you look at Gujarat, if you look at Kerala, in Gujarat the budget gives a lot of concessions to big business, to big capitalists to come and locate plants in their states. In Kerala, instead of spending money that way, actually money was spent in enlarging purchasing power in the hands of the people. That meant the market increased, a lot of activities were created, and as a matter of fact, between 2004-05 and 11-12, per capita state domestic product in Kerala grew at the same rate as in Gujarat. Everybody talks about Gujarat being an example of growth. As a matter of fact, Kerala per capita growth rate was exactly the same. In addition, you actually had all these welfare achievements, and Kerala retained its number one spot. So I think that is the thinking which has gone into left strategy over the last several years, starting from EMS's time, and I think we should continue with that.
In a country like India, where neoliberal policy is accepted by the government, an alternative policy is how much possible in a state like Kerala?
Yes, that's an interesting and important question. That yes, if you have neoliberalism for the country as a whole, what can you do in a state? But my experience is that nonetheless, you can actually push at the boundaries. In other words, it is never the case that you have zero options. It's always the case that the state does have a degree of choice at the margin between spending a rupee in one way or spending it in another way. And I think in that sense, as long as the state government shows its willingness to continue with the pro-people measures that the left in Kerala has been associated with, I think there is still some scope. I agree that at some point it would come into conflict with the centre's ideas and development, but even so, before it has come into conflict, something can still be achieved.
The Chief Minister of Kerala, Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan, has appointed a new economic advisor who is a neoliberal policy supporter. Do you think there is a need for such an economic advisor for Kerala CM, an LDF CM?
I don't want to say anything about an appointment of a professor. I don't know her work, I don't know her views, so I don't want to get into that. But I do think that in Kerala there has been a very strong left tradition. There has been a very strong tradition of development thinking, which is there, and which is articulated by people like Thomas Isaac, V.K. Ramachandran, who are now currently also working at the government level. And I think Kerala will continue along those lines.
My question is not about any particular person. Is there a need for the LDF CM for such an economic advisor who is a neoliberal policy supporter?
That is something which I do not know what kind of thinking he had in his mind, so I would not like to comment on that. I am concerned about the economic strategy of Kerala, and I think as far as that strategy is concerned, well-established strategy that has been a pioneer as far as states in India are concerned, as far as the third world is concerned, because such an immense achievement is something which you don't find in terms of social indicators. So I think that is a strategy I would like to defend. Any threat to that strategy is something which I naturally would not like. But whether this particular incident, appointment, why it took place, and whether it represents a threat and so on that I would not like to say anything.
Okay, but the new economic advisor has declared her strategy that she had to link various departments in Kerala to the knowledge centers in the world and various departments. That is her primary duty. Is it acceptable?
That is really the government's call. In other words, nobody can force the government to do anything. The government feels the need. So I would not like to say anything about it, because I think that's the government's call. If the government feels the need, it will access it. But my concern, as I said, is that the economic strategy of Kerala that Kerala is famous for must be pursued.
You have worked with Mr. Thomas Isaac for years. What is your expectations while he becomes the second time the finance minister?
Basically whenever the UDF is in power, they don't raise additional revenue, and they typically at the end of the UDF period, the finances are in trouble. That was the case in 2006, and that is also the case now. Thomas Isaac had played a very important role at that time in pulling the finances of the state out of the woods, because I remember when we began at the planning board, what we call free plan outlay, over and above whatever is committed expenditures in the plan, the money available with the planning board to allocate across departments and so on, was only 331 crores in the first year that we were making the plan. When I left in the final year, it was 2200 crores. So obviously, this was made possible because of revenue mobilization, resource mobilization, and I think that is to the credit of Thomas Isaac. So I expect him this time also to, because again the finances are in a poor shape, I expect him again to pull the state out of the woods.
What are the challenges before Thomas Isaac to find out the resources for Kerala?
My problem is that at this moment, again, this is where your earlier question about neoliberal policies of the center become important. I'll give you one example. For instance, stamp duty was one where Kerala was, the revenue of the state was increasing. Now, there are some constraints on stamp duty once you have a JNNURM, okay. And once Kerala got into the JNNURM, naturally that kind of buoyancy of the tax revenue to an extent went down. Now I think if GST comes in, there is no immediate certainty about it. Kerala might be a gainer in the short run. But on the other hand, it does constrain you with regard to raising the tax rates at a future date. So even if Kerala is a gainer in the short run and therefore its immediate financial worries may be over, if the left government wants to continue with the kind of strategy we have been following, in that case revenue mobilization becomes very important, but then the rates under GSD are not really in the hands of the state government, because uniform rates, etc. So I think neoliberalism would generally constitute a constraint. But I think the idea of starting a bank in the state is an excellent idea. For instance, if that is carried through, then resources can be mobilized within the state for expenditure and investment within the state.
But without finding out resource from the local production and industrial production, how can he acquire these resource from other sources, such as only from tax reformation and this type of banking?
Tax and borrowing are the two main ways in which the government finances expenditures. Now, I think as far as tax is concerned, sales tax has been the main source of government revenue. If it is replaced by GST, in that case I think immediately Kerala would not be a loser, but on the other hand it does mean that over a period of time you could increase sales tax rates, but you can't really increase GST rates. There may be problems of that kind. Some of the buoyant taxes are the ones where again you may be constrained by the neoliberal policies like stamp duty. But at the same time, the idea of the bank I was talking about is because of the fact that then the government, not directly through the budget because there are some constraints, but let's say, suppose there is a public sector enterprise being started. That public sector enterprise does not have to be financed out of the budget. It can actually take loans. And now if the state government has a bank of its own, then the government would be able to make funds available to such an enterprise from the bank. Okay. And what is more, I think it is not only public sector enterprises. I think within Kerala, a range of enterprises can come up, including small enterprises. And I think if the state government does have a bank, the bank should also provide technical and managerial assistance to some of the new enterprises that may come up.
But the new bank concept of LDF is based on the cooperative sector money. Is it possible to acquire all the cooperative sector debt money to form a bank in India as per Indian banking norms?
Cooperatives can deposit money. The idea is that if there is such a state government owned bank, then cooperatives which are having cash reserves can in fact put it into bank deposits. But additionally, I don't visualize such a bank remaining confined only to cooperative sector's money. It should raise deposits from the public. Okay, because a lot of these deposits, as I said, credit deposit ratios in lots of these states, including Kerala, are extremely unfavorable, which basically means deposits are then channeled to other uses in other states. So if you have state government owned bank, then you can improve the credit deposit ratio, disburse credit within the state, and this disbursing can take the form of supporting a whole lot of small enterprises.
So the banking concept based on the cooperative sector have to be rewritten by the LDF. That is what we.
Yes. I mean, it should be widened not just to include deposits by cooperatives, but it should be widened to include deposits by from the public. There are treasury deposits now. Some of those can be put into the bank.
Central government has demolished the planning commission, and the state government has the planning board itself. How it is possible?
Let me say one thing. Kerala has always had a planning board which is far more active. This goes back again to EMS's time, which is far more active and far more dynamic than the planning board in any other state in the country, including left-ruled states like West Bengal and Tripura, etc. Because elsewhere, the planning boards, there are some states in which they are not even planning boards, they are basically planning departments of the government, which are really like any part of the overall bureaucracy. But Kerala has always had a planning board because I think the left in Kerala or the left government has always been nourished by ideas thrown up by the planning board, by an independent stance that is taken by the planning board. There are all kinds of project proposals which come to a state government. If those project proposals have to be correctly assessed, vetted, in that case this cannot just be done through the departmental machinery. It requires a lot of assistance of another kind, not only expert technical assistance, but also the political economy impact of such a project. I think the planning board that way is a very useful thing, very important, and I'm very glad that Kerala state government has not abandoned the planning board, that the planning board in Kerala continues to be a vigorous entity, even though the planning commission has been destroyed, decimated by the Modi government.
What is your take on the demolition of planning commission and setting up a Niti Ayog?
I'm completely opposed to it because, you see, it is certainly true. It is certainly true that the planning commission itself, which originally, when it was started, was supposed to be an independent entity, became essentially a very departmental body of the central government. The planning commission, for instance, did not have representatives from state governments. It was entirely union government controlled body. But you see, the planning commission, I mean, if you look at every country that has gone through neoliberalism, the standard trick is that you get people from the IMF and the World Bank and you put them in finance ministry. Finance ministry becomes a dominant ministry through which every ministry's demand for grants is channelized. Their representatives sit in every ministry. So effectively what happens is that the international financial institutions control the government through the creation of the finance ministry as a super ministry, to which all the big bureaucrats are recruited from international institutions. Now the planning commission represented a check on that. I know that in Manmohan Singh's time the planning commission was headed by a person who himself was from the World Bank, but nonetheless it had a kind of role of checking, because there were other independent members as well. It acts as a check on neoliberal ways of hijacking the government's agenda. For instance, I know that the Planning Commission played an important role in setting up this Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, which actually played a role in reviving Indian agriculture for some time, even though agriculture has not revived to the point where it was before liberalization began. So the Planning Commission did represent some kind of a check on neoliberalism, some kind of a way of ensuring that under a neoliberal regime, nonetheless, that that the peasantry did not suffer, that it was suffering, but to put some kind of a check on it. But I think that is gone. Okay. When you say planning commission has gone, then who does the tasks of the planning commission? Finance ministry or other concerned departmental ministry is completely therefore bureaucratized and controlled by the central government. There is a second aspect to it, that some funds used to be made available to the state governments through the planning commission. Okay, planning commission had some rules about it. Now those funds would be getting, now the current Niti Aayog doesn't make any funds available. So those funds would have to come through the central departments. That's a centralization of power. Planning commission itself was a kind of operated a bit like a central department, but not like a normal central department. Okay, it had a degree of autonomy. Now that's gone.
The central government is also giving up the 5-year plan for development, but Kerala CM Pinarayi said that he will follow the 5-year plan policy for states development. Is it possible? Is it practical? What do you think?
Yes, because I don't see why the state should not make its own plan. In other words, the state has an idea of the resources it will be getting over a period of 5 years. The state knows the resources it can mobilize over a period of 5 years. So I think defining its own priorities, so that which are the areas you're going to spend, how much is going to spend, and so on, is a very useful exercise.
Okay. What is your take on Thomas Isaac new budget, state budget?
I have not actually read the budget, but I only read in the newspapers that he has raised some innovative taxes, and to the extent all that helps in pulling the state out of the woods in financial terms, I think it will be excellent.
Okay. I think you have noticed the Millennium port in Kerala, which is going to be set up linked to Adani Group. Do you think this type of development plan is suitable for Kerala?
No, my point is, if you are saying how does Kerala develop, I believe this is not the, in other words, relying on these measures, relying on these projects as a means of developing the state is something which would not work. Okay, because as I said, the poverty in Kerala is one where traditional petty producers are very severely depressed. Their incomes have to be raised. You are not going to be able to provide them with jobs outside to the extent that the whole sector can therefore be vacated, and therefore something has to be done to improve their lot. State government has to play a very important role, but the point is, okay, these projects are there. Within any country there are these projects, some of them come towards the state government, fine. I mean, I'm not saying Kerala should say that we don't want these projects. If they come, well and good. Even if large investment comes, well and good. But I'm saying that you cannot rely on that, which is what other states do, relying on that as the growth engine. I don't think that is going to work.
If the NRI money is stopped, what is the alternative for Kerala?
No, but you see, I think NRI money should not be stopped. I mean, it's not very clear why should it stop, because after all, let's not, NRI money is itself in some sense a part of the Kerala development strategy, because the Kerala development strategy does mean production of certain kinds of skills, a certain amount of education, all of which puts people of Kerala at an advantage compared to people from other states, even in the job market in the Middle East. Okay, so the point, for instance, I've heard that as Kerala emigres move up the job hierarchy, the lower rungs of the job hierarchy are filled by people from other states. So that in some sense, Kerala was a pioneer, and so that labor export from Kerala is something which played an important role, and it's something which is in a sense a part of the Kerala development strategy. Okay. I don't see why this flow of funds into the state should dry up. At the same time, there are many people who say that inside Kerala nothing is happening, all of it is because of money from outside. That's not true. Okay, because you look at any reasonable estimate of the proportion of remittances, the state has done far better than that proportion of remittances would suggest. For instance, you look at the development of welfare indicators, all over the state they are very high. They are not just high in districts from which the emigres go. Okay, so I think the remittances are important. They have played an important role. one should be happy about it. But at the same time, the state is much more than these remittances. I think one of the ways that these remittances can be put to good use is precisely the kind of bank that we are talking about. The bank can actually take in funds so that these funds are not deposited and credit given in other states, but actually some of these funds can generate investment within the state itself.
If you get a chance to work with Kerala's socio-economic development sector again, will you accept it?
I'm old now. When I had gone, I was 10 years younger, and so since I was 10 years younger, now my priorities in life are different. I want to write a few books which I have been working on and so on. So I would be reluctant to move out of my current habitat.
So you will not accept?
Well, as I said, I'd be reluctant to move out of my current habitat because my priorities are different now. I'm an older person.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You.
Thank you.